My name is Sarah, and I thought I had found my spiritual home at Grace Community Church. But what I didn't know was that the man behind the pulpit was living a lie, one that would shatter everything I believed in. Little did I know, he was hiding a secret family, and I was about to become the last person he wanted to see. I remember the first time I met him like it was yesterday. He walked into our small church with this radiant smile, warm handshake, and these piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. It was as if he had an aura of calm around him. He'd preach for hours, but his words never felt like a sermon. They were stories of hope, love, and redemption. I'll never forget the first time I met Pastor John. He was warm, kind, and had this gentle way of making everyone in the congregation feel seen. His wife, Emily, would often sit with me after service, listening to my struggles with faith and relationships. They were like family, or so I thought. But it wasn't until a small group meeting that things started to unravel. He was explaining the concept of brokenness as a necessary step towards healing. But his examples seemed personal, too personal. I remember feeling a shiver run down my spine when he shared about the one who got away. It sounded like a story from his own life, not just some biblical parable. But I pushed it aside. After all, what do you know? He's the pastor. And besides, Emily seemed so distant that day, almost as if she was watching him with a mix of concern and sadness in her eyes. I brushed it off as mere speculation, but deep down, something didn't feel right. It started with a casual conversation in the church office. He mentioned that his wife was out of town on a spiritual retreat, and he needed to pick up their young daughter from daycare. I remember thinking, that's so sweet of him. But as we chatted, I noticed that every time he talked about his family, there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. He seemed almost guarded. At first, I wrote it off as mere exhaustion or concern for his daughter's well-being. I mean, who wouldn't be worried about their kid? But the more we talked, the more I sensed an underlying tension. It was like he was waiting for me to ask a specific question, and when I didn't, he seemed relieved. I remember feeling a tiny spark of curiosity, but it quickly fizzled out as I attributed it to my own overactive imagination. He's just stressed about work, I told myself. But that fleeting moment of doubt lingered, like a whisper in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake off that nagging feeling, no matter how hard I had tried to push it aside. Every Sunday morning as I'd sit in the pews, listening to his sermons, I'd catch myself glancing at him differently. His kind words and warm smile seemed almost rehearsed. But what really threw me was when he'd take time off from leading the congregation to visit a family member or attend a conference. It always felt like an excuse, but I had no reason to question it. That was until I saw her, his daughter. She was at our church's summer camp, and something about her resemblance to him caught my attention. I tried to brush it off as mere coincidence, but the more I thought about it, the more a disturbing picture began to form in my mind. A family of his own, with children and a wife who knew nothing about his double life. It was a lie, a secret he'd kept from us all. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. He was a pastor, I was the congregation, but I had no idea what kind of man he really was. As I stood in that dimly lit office, staring at the man who had held such power over my life for so long, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of contradictions. My mind racing with questions. How could he do this? How could he deceive me like this? And most of all, why did I let him get away with it for so long? I thought back to all the sermons he'd preached about honesty and integrity, and how he'd always made us feel like we were part of something special. But now, I saw him as just another hypocrite, using his position to manipulate and control. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, for staying in the church, for trusting him, for being so blind. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it wasn't my fault. But deep down, I knew that was just what he wanted me to believe. He'd always made me feel like I was the problem, not him. As I looked at him, I felt a cold fury rising up inside me, and for the first time, I saw the truth. He was a master manipulator, using his charm and charisma to get what he wanted. As the news spread through our small community, the church leadership was faced with a daunting decision. They had to choose between protecting their reputation or confronting the truth about their beloved pastor's actions. I remember attending an urgency meeting where we were told that he would be taking a leave of absence to seek guidance and counseling. But deep down, I knew it was a damage control measure. The church didn't want to lose its faithful flock, but they also couldn't risk the scandal tarnishing their image. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our pastor had spent years preaching about integrity, honesty, and transparency. Yet, when faced with his own actions, he and the church leadership chose to sweep it under the rug. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy. They tried to isolate him from the congregation, but I knew that wouldn't last. The truth would come out eventually, and when it did, it would be devastating for all of us involved. The fallout as the truth began to unravel, our lives were forever changed. I remember walking into church on Sunday morning, expecting a sense of community and support. Instead, I was met with whispers, stares, and tears. The woman he had fathered a child with sat in the front pew, her eyes locked on me with a mixture of shame and defiance. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could someone we trusted so deeply betray us all? The church was in an uproar. Some members rallied around me, offering condolences and support. Others distanced themselves, unable to reconcile their faith with his actions. I recall one woman, who had confided in me about her own marital struggles, suddenly disappearing from our Sunday gatherings. I couldn't bear the thought of attending services anymore, knowing he was still there, a symbol of everything that had been shattered. The fallout was as painful for those who remained silent as it was for those who spoke out. We were all victims, in one way or another. As the scandal unfolded, our community was torn apart by conflicting emotions. Some members rallied around me, offering support and understanding. They saw the pain in my eyes and knew that I had been wronged. But others, well, they just looked away. They whispered behind closed doors, questioning my motives, my character. I remember one woman, a devoted member of our church, who confronted me after Sunday service. She said, "Sarah, how could you not have known? You were always so involved." I felt like I was on trial, with her judgmental gaze piercing through me. But I couldn't help but wonder, wasn't she also blind to the truth? I recall another member, a young mother, who reached out and hugged me in the parking lot. She told me that my husband's actions didn't define me, that I was still a beloved sister in Christ. Her words of comfort were like balm to my soul. The community's reaction was a microcosm of society itself. Some chose to turn a blind eye, while others stood up for what was right. And as the pastor's downfall loomed, we all had to confront our own roles in enabling his behavior. It was as if the entire church was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to happen. The pastor's secrets had finally begun to unravel, and the congregation was reeling from the shock. I remember the day he failed to show up for a Sunday service. It was like a collective gasp went through the room. Some of us were in denial, thinking this was just another episode of his struggles, but deep down we knew better. The truth was, our beloved pastor had been embezzling funds from the church to support his second family. He had lied to us, manipulated us, and used his position for personal gain. As I stood in that pulpit, surrounded by the people he had deceived, I felt like a prisoner of my own emotions. The weight of his betrayal crushed me, but I knew I couldn't stay stuck in that darkness forever. I started attending therapy sessions, and, slowly, I began to unravel the threads of guilt and shame that bound me. I realized that I wasn't to blame for his actions. He had made a choice to hurt us, not me. I started journaling, writing down all my thoughts and feelings. It was cathartic, like releasing a dam of emotions I'd been holding back. I wrote about the pain, the anger, but also about the moments when I felt love and compassion for him. It wasn't easy, but it was a step towards healing. I started to see that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about freeing myself from its grip. I remember one of my therapists said, "Sarah, you're not just healing from his betrayal, you're healing from the way he made you feel about yourself." Those words struck a chord. I realized that I'd been carrying around this heavy burden, thinking I was worthless and unlovable because of what he did. But as I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who deserved love, kindness, and compassion, not just from others, but from herself. As I look back on that journey, one thing is clear. We were all deceived by the perfect facade of our pastor's life. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. I remember the countless times I'd see him smile at church, shaking hands and hugging parishioners, like he genuinely cared for each and every one of us. He had this gift of making everyone feel seen and heard, but it was all just an act. One of the most painful lessons we learned was that even in a community built on faith, people can still be hurtful and deceitful. It made me realize that no matter how sacred our relationships may seem, they're not immune to the same flaws as any other human connection. We were all so caught up in worshiping him as a leader, we forgot to hold him accountable for his actions. It was a hard lesson to learn, but one I'll never forget. Just because someone wears a title or has a position of power doesn't mean they're above reproach. As the news spread like wildfire through our small community, I watched in horror as people's faces crumpled with shock and disappointment. The pastor who had been their spiritual leader for years, who had counseled them through divorce and death, was revealed to be a master manipulator, hiding a dark secret behind his pulpit. For many of us, it was like a punch to the gut. We felt betrayed not just by him, but by our own faith. How could someone so revered, someone who had helped us find solace in our darkest moments, be capable of such deceit? I remember one woman, Mary, who would often sit in the front row, her eyes closed in prayer during services. She was a pillar of our community, and when the scandal broke, she couldn't bring herself to step foot in church for weeks. Her faith was shaken to its core. How could God allow this to happen? The question echoed through our small town, leaving us all to grapple with the deeper questions. Can we still trust those who wear a title of authority? Can we still call ourselves followers of Christ when the ones leading the flock turn out to be wolves in sheep's clothing? As I reflect on our journey, I know that many of you have been affected by similar scandals or betrayals in your own lives. You may be struggling to understand how someone you trusted could hurt you so deeply. Or perhaps you're trying to support a loved one who's going through this pain. Whatever the case, my heart goes out to each and every one of you. When someone has been betrayed by those they trusted, it can feel like the rug has been pulled from under their feet. They may be questioning everything, their faith, their values, even themselves. That's why it's essential to offer a listening ear, not judgment or advice. Allow them to process their emotions and come to their own conclusions. I remember a conversation I had with Sarah, who was struggling to support her friend after she discovered her pastor husband's infidelity. She felt lost and unsure of how to help. I encouraged her to simply be present, to let her friend know that she believes her and is there for her, no matter what. By being a safe space, Sarah was able to help her friend heal in ways they never thought possible. As you navigate these complex situations, remember that supporting those affected means being present, not fixing the problem. It's okay to say, "I don't know what to do," or "I'm here for you." Sometimes, that's all someone needs. As I reflect on our situation, I realized that there were several red flags that I had ignored or dismissed as mere rumors. A fellow church member would frequently show up late to services, only to sit in the front row, flaunting his designer suit and expensive watch. Another woman from our small group would often complain about her husband's infidelity, yet she'd still attend our Bible studies with him by her side. As I reflect on those dark days, I realize that forgiveness was the only way to break free from the weight of his betrayal. It wasn't easy. I mean, he'd shattered our entire marriage, left me for another woman, and even fathered a child with her. But I knew I had a choice. Let anger consume me, or find a way to heal. Forgiveness was the bridge that spanned the chasm between us, not for him, but for me. It allowed me to stop dwelling on what he'd done and focus on rebuilding my life. As I looked around the church, I saw familiar faces, people who had been praying for me, crying with me, and standing by me through all this chaos. The community had become my lifeline. They didn't judge me or try to fix me. They just listened. And in that moment, I realized that was exactly what I needed. Their words of encouragement, their hugs, and their prayers gave me the strength to keep going. It's funny, when you're going through a tough time, people often say you're not alone. But it's hard to feel like you're not alone when everyone around you seems to be pretending that everything is okay. But these people, they didn't pretend. They acknowledged my pain and let me grieve in my own way. And slowly but surely, I began to heal. The community became a safe space for me to process my emotions, to work through the guilt, shame, and anger. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. As I reflect on my experience, I realize that there were red flags all along, but I chose to ignore them. I want to share with you the common signs that may indicate a person is hiding a secret life or engaging in deceitful behavior. As I reflect on the aftermath of our pastor's scandal, I'm reminded that the impact on our children was just as devastating as mine own. Our kids had always looked up to him as a role model, and his betrayal shook their sense of trust and security. They felt like they'd been living in a lie, and it's hard to imagine how painful that must have been for them. As I reflect on our time in the church, I realize that creating a support network was crucial for me, especially during those early days of deception. It's not just about having people around you. It's about building relationships with individuals who can offer unconditional love and guidance. One of my closest friends, Rachel, would often invite me to join her book club. It seemed like a harmless activity, but it became a sanctuary for me. We'd discuss our faith, share personal struggles, and pray together. Those moments gave me the strength to keep going, even when everything else felt like it was crumbling. When I look back, I see how essential those connections were in helping me navigate this dark time. I wish I could have done more to nurture them earlier on. If you're facing a similar situation, don't wait until crisis strikes to build your support network. Surround yourself with people who care about you and your well-being. Attend community events, join a book club or Bible study group. Anything that helps you connect with like-minded individuals. In the next section, I'll share why self-care was more than just a buzzword for me during this time. It became a lifeline. As I look back on those darkest days, I realize how crucial self-care was for me to survive. People often think that when you're facing trauma or stress, the only thing that matters is getting through it. But that's a lie. It's not just about pushing forward. It's about preserving your soul. For me, self-care wasn't just yoga classes and meditation, although those were nice perks. It was about finding moments of peace in chaos. As I navigated the darkest days of my marriage imploding, I knew I couldn't do this alone. The shame, guilt, and anger were suffocating me. That's when I made the hardest but wisest decision: seeking professional help. As I look back on that darkest chapter of my life, I see a glimmer of hope, not just for myself, but for all those who've walked through similar fires. You know, people often ask me how I survived the pain of betrayal by someone I trusted so deeply, a man who called himself a spiritual leader, no less. My answer is simple: faith in the human spirit. When you're broken, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but trust me, it's there. And for me, that light was therapy. It was the safe space where I could process my emotions, confront the demons head-on, and slowly rebuild myself from scratch. I remember those early sessions like they were yesterday, tears streaming down my face, raw honesty pouring out of my heart, but also a spark of resilience growing within me. That's what I want to leave you with today. Hope that healing is possible, no matter how shattered your world may seem. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. And when it does, you'll look back on this season of your life with a newfound appreciation for the strength within yourself. As we reflect on Sarah's journey, I want to emphasize that her story is not just a cautionary tale about toxic relationships, but also a testament to the power of community and forgiveness. Think back to when Sarah was struggling to come to terms with her husband's deception. She didn't face it alone. She had a network of friends who supported her through prayer, counseling, and emotional support. And when she finally found the courage to leave him, she did so knowing that she deserved better. As we close this chapter in Sarah's journey, I want you to remember that her story is not just about the pain and betrayal she endured. It's also about the strength and resilience she found within herself. And even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for healing, growth, and redemption. Take the lessons from her story to heart, and know that you are not alone in your struggles or triumphs. You are part of a community that understands the complexities of love and relationships. If you're struggling with your own relationship drama, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel for more true stories and insights.